8 unknown powerful evenings. Well, today let's talk about the renewed peace proposal that Putin apparently made to Zelensky again. It was mentioned vaguely there. Nevertheless, let's see what's going on in Crimea. The situation there is extremely difficult. And in general, there's nothing good here for anyone at all. Neither for Ukraine nor for Russia. We'll discuss all of this now, so let's get started. Yes, but before we start, look at the t-shirt I'm wearing today with Usim Nezlamni. It's a powerful morning, but there will also be a powerful evening. So, if you want, this merch is available, you can buy it. Here's the link down below. Anyway, let's get started now with the proposal for peace here. Putin stated that he is ready to start peace negotiations based on the long-suffering Istanbul agreements, which were reached 4 years ago. That was 4 years ago, back in 2022, when Boris Johnson came and said, "No, we'll fight until the 1991 borders." And in the end, we have what we have now. On June 23, Putin made this statement during a speech to members of the government. He admitted that he sees Ukraine striking targets on Russian territory and stated that those responsible must ensure that such strikes do not happen again. Well, but here it's probably easier said than done. We'll see how these responsible people will carry out Putin's instructions and how they will implement them. It seems to me that this will be extremely difficult and probably heads will roll, well, in a figurative sense. Then Putin said that Ukraine is most likely trying to strengthen its negotiating position. But he doesn't pay attention to that and stated that it is worth resuming peace talks based on the agreements. Istanbul in 2022 based on the theses at the Russian Foreign Ministry meeting in 2024, taking into account Anchorage in 2025 and based on the realities on the ground in 2026. In general, everything is complicated here. If you combine all of this, I think some points of the agreement will contradict each other. That's the main thing. From Putin's statements, the additional threats that Russia is trying to create for the Kiev regime should be minimized. This is an absolutely solvable task. Kiev is only trying to create the impression of strong positions for negotiations, but the realities on the battlefield are completely different. The Kiev regime can only be described as neo-Nazi. Nothing like this has existed since World War II. Putin also emphasized that he demanded officials pay the closest attention to their areas of responsibility. Amid Ukrainian armed forces attacks on civilian targets and strikes on Russia, including children, special military operation fighters are further motivated to complete their missions. Putin sees no reason to move away from the Istanbul agreements. Russia will continue to move confidently in all directions of development. The negotiation principles are those of Istanbul, Anchorage, and current realities. Also, the Foreign Affairs Ministry speech in 2024. As for the Istanbul agreements of 2022, these are the Kremlin's demands that Ukraine declare eternal neutrality, which was the original requirement. Refusal to join NATO. By the way, Ukraine is no longer being accepted into NATO. And this has been stated repeatedly by Ruta, protagonist Semart, and this whole gang. They're not accepting, that's it. They limited the number of armed forces to 300,000 people. Basically, that's not a small number. It's not like in Japan after World War II, where they limited it completely, just a few tens of thousands, I think. They were forbidden to have their own. There, some armed formations didn't even have heavy weapons. It received security guarantees from the US, the UK, and China, while the Russian Federation would have the right to veto any decision made by these guarantors. And the issue of Crimea would be postponed for 15 years while the DPR and LPR would need to be discussed further. Overall, nothing unusual happened, everything was normal, and both sides had agreed in the spring and were ready to sign. Again, this was before the appearance of that blonde character, because as for 2024, naturally, Putin also made statements that, in order to end the war, Ukraine must withdraw from Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson regions without a fight. And everything that has already been seized by the Russian Federation must be recognized as Russian, plus NATO, again, must not admit Ukraine, and the West must unconditionally lift all sanctions. And Anchorage, well, things were already a bit different there. Plus, the exact content of these agreements is unknown, so it's hard to judge or speculate about Anchorage here. But there were already some compromises being made. And as far as I remember, it was already limited only to the Donetsk region of the DPR, meaning the part that is under Ukraine. So that Ukraine would withdraw from the 20 areas of the Donetsk region still under its control. And then it would have been possible to talk about peace, at least that was the case back then, that's what was being discussed at the time. But in general, let's wait for Kiev's response. In my opinion, the answer will be, as always, in some mocking tone, in the style of Sibiga. Probably this character with the best knowledge of English in the world will say something like peace through. Pisurus ranks, the original pronunciation is preserved, and we'll be looking for this ranks everywhere we can. The war is still ongoing, and the AFU continues to strike various infrastructure targets with drones, including important logistics sites like bridges. Bridges are being destroyed in Crimea, and one of them was destroyed in just 2 nights. An attempt to restore it was also thwarted. We're talking about the bridge over the North Crimean Canal. It's no longer there in Crimea, at least that's what the AFU says. The site was located near the village of Rozdolnoye. Rozdolny was a strategically important military logistics artery. The destroyed bridge served the following purpose. Cargo and military resources were transported across it in 2 directions, from the territory of the Russian Federation through Crimea to supply the forces in the south, and also within the peninsula to support the Crimean military infrastructure. And as a result, this bridge was bombed. What this will lead to is still unclear, but it is obvious that the already difficult logistics will get worse. And then the head of these very drone systems, Ader, from Ukraine, stated that several important targets were destroyed overnight. According to him, 60 targets in the operational depth of Crimea and in the south were hit. Among the destroyed targets were 3 cruise missile carriers, 4 air defense systems, an oil depot, a gas distribution station, and an electrical substation. Well, for example, here it shows what and how. Here, actually, he explains it himself, but for some reason it's not loading. This is supposed to be YouTube. Yeah, well, here all of these are shown. These are systems that fly, and this is a drone. This is logistics. These are airplanes, airfields. Well, you can see for yourself that everything here is recorded just as it looks. That is, quite a large number of targets are being destroyed. By the way, I've heard the opinion that Ukraine is showing all this now in order to cover up failures in the Donetsk direction, where a lot is being captured by the Russian Federation. But in general, it's worth looking into this information more deeply, and I'll make a separate episode about the Donetsk direction. As far as I remember, that's the oil refinery burning there, and the destruction is quite severe. So here, all the targets hit by Mader's drones are shown, and there's something else in the forest here, apparently military. That's us. I don't even know what's smoking there anymore. Well, anyway, a lot is being bombed here, and the main thing that this very Mader emphasizes is that the work was done by medium-class drones. Let's move on. Let's go. Here, too, half the people write to us after strikes on Crimea saying there's no electricity. So why call the video horrors in Crimea? There really is no power. I think I've already said in the 3rd video that people in Crimea have to go through some real horror over and over again. Back in 2014, their water and electricity were cut off. Then there were problems, and now there are problems again. It's just crazy, such a beautiful region, and yet so much violence and so many problems like this. All this is happening, you could say, in paradise. When I was in Crimea, I really loved it there. It was a long time ago, but still I have only the best memories. Alright, and here's a fire. At the thermal power plant in Kerch, Crimea, they say the fire started after the plant was bombed. Half of the peninsula was left without power, plus Ukrainian drones targeted this area for the 2nd time in 3 days. There's no power in Yevpatoria, Saki, Krasnoperekopsk, Jankoy, and other areas as well. The main reason, of course, is disruptions in the electrical networks, but without infrastructure, nothing will function properly. The official opinion of the representatives of the energy company. Due to technological disruptions in the electrical networks, consumers in the urban districts of Yevpatoria, Saki, Krasnoperekopsk, and Jankoy were disconnected. Well, and here is some more information about a repeated strike on the oil depot in the port of Kerch, the oil products transshipment complex. In short, there's a huge problem with oil products in general. Not all regions of Russia are facing this issue right now, but it's somehow spreading and expanding, and now it's not just in Crimea where gasoline and other oil derivatives are disappearing. Because oil refineries are, of course, critical facilities that turn crude oil into what we know as gasoline, diesel, and some other oil products. And without them, modern civilization simply can't function, let alone the operation of any kind of military installations. That's why, apparently, this program to destroy oil and oil refining infrastructure in Ukraine was developed over a long period, and now the elements of that plan are being carried out. We don't know everything yet, but I think things will become clear over time. The situation is so serious that now they're even discussing importing gasoline due to the decline in domestic production. You need to understand again that the problem isn't oil supply, there's plenty of oil. Some commenters once wrote to me, "We have so much oil." And it's true, there's a huge amount of oil, but the fact is that so many storage tanks and the refineries themselves, the modules, specifically the ones that process the oil, have been destroyed. But this isn't just a mosquito bite. As some people wrote, it's actually an extremely sensitive issue for the oil refining industry. That's why now there are already reports coming out about a severe shortage and a collapse in domestic production. Russia only has a quarter of its gasoline left, which is significant. To prevent a fuel collapse, price increases, rising prices, and lines at gas stations. The Russian government is considering buying fuel from abroad, plus providing subsidies to artificially limit retail prices. Well, it's all because business is business and capitalism is capitalism. And the less gasoline and other petroleum products there are, the higher the prices get. I think we all understand that. According to sources, as a result of attacks on fuel infrastructure last week, Russia lost about a quarter of its gasoline production volume. Compared to the average daily figure for June 2025, the volumes have now decreased to about 90,000 metric tons per day. And the company's analysts' data show that in just the first half of June, Russia's seaborne exports of petroleum products fell by 15%. Due to the deep supply crisis, many regions of the Russian Federation are already reporting restrictions on the free sale of fuel. And by the way, I talked about this on my Telegram channel. And you can point your phone or tablet camera at this QR code and you'll go straight to the Telegram channel. There the information is presented concisely and very clearly. If you don't have time or inspiration, I don't know why, just watch the videos. And what else? On Monday, June 22, the Deputy Prime Minister of the Russian Federation held a closed meeting. It's clear that this information came from some anonymous sources. Not mine, of course, but from the media I used. But here, for the first time, he supposedly raised the issue of importing fuel as an official option to save the current situation. And then government representatives also stated that the Kremlin plans to subsidize imported gasoline. Why? In order to keep prices at gas stations under control, since product shortages are an extremely sensitive issue. So, what problems with the refineries are being shown here? There are many of them on fire, but most of them have already been affected. Just like in Ukraine during the winter, I think there wasn't a single thermal power plant that wasn't shelled, and now about the same thing is happening with the refineries. And on June 13, Novaya Gazeta reports that major gas station chains have started to limit fuel sales in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Tatarstan. Right now, some gas stations have fuel, some don't, but there's another problem. I read yesterday what it is. The thing is, agriculture and construction also need huge amounts of fuel. Equipment like cranes, bulldozers, or other machinery won't just go to a regular gas station. They are supplied using special cubes, huge cube-shaped containers where fuel is poured in, and usually these cubes are refueled separately, right there on site from the construction area at special stations, not in the fields. But now nothing like that is happening. That's why representatives of the construction and agricultural sectors make arrangements with major chains and fuel suppliers and come to fill these tanks directly at the gas stations themselves. You may have seen this yourself. So, when people post photos of these tanks and say that speculators have arrived, that's not the case. In most cases, these are actually people from the industries I mentioned. Although they don't rule out the possibility that some actual speculators do come and try to profit from something they really shouldn't. But as we know, if you really want to, you can. So, let's wrap it up. Yes, Be sure to write what you think about this, because when I was writing, by the way, back when the problems in Crimea were just starting, there was a real clash in the comments between the residents of Crimea themselves. There were those who said, everything is great here, we're practically snacking on red caviar with black caviar, washing it down with gasoline at the same time. Others said, why are you lying? What's the point of lying? If the situation is really difficult, please write about what's happening with you and how serious the situation actually is. It would also be good if you could share your opinion on when things might get better. Well, now let's really move on to these very powerful leaders. The TV is on, they'll be invited in soon, but first let's play this character who'll tell us how pleased he is with his achievements and with this whole effort in general. Why are you shouting like that? Just like that, like this, like this. That's it, and let's turn down the volume of the character a bit so he doesn't bother you too much with his work, but...
Write subtitles in the comments.
Subtitles by Dima Torzak. Yes.
The negotiators' efforts have yielded no results, so we should hear from powerful leaders.
Well then, let's listen to the clowns now, please.
My apologies. And now come the comrades who, dear viewers, are not really our comrades at all. There's this historian Polly, who once again is trying to present some nonsense. And why do I say that? Because I've already listened to him talk about this situation before. Journalists called him a few months ago wanting to interview him, and by the way, he said that he had a stomachache and in his opinion he was poisoned by Russian spies. But it was so strange that honestly I suspected that not only his stomach hurt, but also whatever he thinks with. Well, that already depends on the circumstances. It's extremely interesting.
Billy Oriel for our president, it's not about historical context.
It's not just that Poland wants to assert itself at our expense. It doesn't really succeed in asserting itself with others.
Honestly, I don't get what assert themselves at our expense means. What kind of phrase is that? But I suppose the historian knows more.
And I have to say, the president is just standing there, but there's no real power.
Where is he standing? Why isn't he sitting or lying down? Why is he standing?
He doesn't have much influence, actually. What else is there for him to say? Poland doesn't really know its own history.
But historian Poli knows the history of Poland. There are some characters like that. Well, honestly, I hadn't heard of him before, except for that story. But here it's clear that the guy is doing fine. Everything is great in his own world. He says the president of Poland has no control over the state and just does some whitewashing and painting. But historian Poli is an extremely active character with a huge number of levers. Where and what kind? Well, that's a topic for a separate discussion.
And they're fine with it. Now we could even hold some kind of Polish song contest.
Honestly, I don't get what he's saying. If you do, let me know. Of course, there are others as well. Who do we have here? Here we have Yugochka Lyutsenko, who was both the Prosecutor General of Ukraine and the Minister of Internal Affairs without having a law degree. Now Yugo, having arrived from Kugoktov, is telling us that Crimea is Ukrainian, that's it. Yura is already flying to capture it, already shooting lasers from his eyes, and well, that's it.
Give us the kind of resources that will ensure a breakthrough at the front.
Let Yura break through the front. The journalist looks confused. What kind of resources? A battering ram or what? What?
Restoring Ukrainian control over the Dnipro's left bank is key. Once we reach Melitopol, Crimea will automatically return to Ukraine.
And if we stand somewhere in that very Kunashir, then what automatically becomes Ukrainian there? Yura is just, well, such a Terminator that he'll destroy everyone and everything. They're probably holding him back on purpose in the studio so he doesn't go straight to the front and start tearing apart entire divisions with his bare hands. It's like Ilya Muromets, only the opposite.
If we're truly planning to fortify the territory, we must organize mobilization.
Well, I see. Well, of course, someone has to do it, but not Yura, because Yura can't. There's also General Crimean, who says, I'll show it in a video, he says they're not letting him into the army. Can you imagine that poor guy? Well, they're not letting the general go fight, so he has to sit in the kitchen with a flag and talk about lowering the mobilization age. The general says it's easy to lower it. Lowering the mobilization age, got it. If your relatives, even if he has any, I'm not sure, are abroad, then everything is easy. Honestly, I don't know where they're fighting, but judging by the fact that for 99% of Ukrainian officials, their children and all their relatives are either abroad, exempted, or supposedly fighting. But somewhere near Kiev, sitting and sipping a latte in their neighborhood, you can probably extrapolate this situation to Krivonosets as well. I see, well, the elimination of full education. Now, that's simply the goal of this Crimeanis. All right.
The draft has always meant survival. Now it's simple. That's what the fields hold.
Well, yes, it's very simple, but more children will die, oh Lord, but not their own, of course.
Now, the point is that they're sucking without stopping. I'm trying to say that mobilization has led to people leaving the country. You know, honestly, to put it simply, Kirill came out. We don't need people. We need equipment. We need ammunition.
And who is we? If a general isn't fighting, I posted in my Telegram channel how he's living his best life somewhere out there wearing expensive sunglasses in his own car. I'll show you now. Yeah, I found that very Telegram channel I showed you, but compare, you're the ones who are supposed to be fighting. And our general drives around in a fancy car just like that, yeah. And now we need weapons. And since our... And as for the language, fine, give us weapons, Mr. General, and we'll go fight.
And don't we also need to humiliate people and mobilize them? But then let's figure it out after all. What should we do with the several million who are either successfully getting worse or buying their way out of the front?
They, for example, support the economy. Here I think Mr. General doesn't understand that the country has an economy, and someone has to support this economy. The general himself receives a salary. Well, maybe he gets some other sources of income, but he is not an element of the economy. I'm sure he doesn't pay taxes because there are benefits, all kinds of subsidies and so on. But in order for the country's budget to be filled, including the military one, someone has to work, not millions. Someone has to fight, someone has to work, and someone has to earn money so that this money is spent inside the country to support domestic producers, to pay taxes. Well, but for the general that's necessary. I think he could already defend a doctoral thesis in economics. All of them there.
There has to be something.
Well, obviously send everyone to the front, send them all there, that's how it is. In short, there are talks about peace, but whether they will actually lead to peace or not is still unclear. And also, there's a huge problem with Crimea, and it's still unclear how all of this will end. Let's wait and let's still hope that in the end peace will come, and the sky above our heads will stop being just a wish and will become the reality of today. Goodbye, everyone.